Thank you to everyone online for joining us live for today's Investing in Psychedelics, Building Value Through IP, Session 2, IP, Pitfalls and Potential. Presented by the CSE, CFN Media with Frank Lane, and of course, Zuber Lawler. We are pleased to have 3 companies, 1 guest moderator, and 1 guest expert panelist. Sher Ali Butt, founder and CEO of CB Therapeutics, Inc. Dr. Joseph Tucker, CEO, MagicMed Industries, Inc. Penny White, CEO, NeonMind Biosciences, Inc., proudly listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange under symbol NEON. That is the only plug I will do. Our guest moderator today is Paul Rosen, Executive Director, Global Go, and our expert panelist is David Wood, Partner, BLG. Now, David's going to be joining us in a few moments. We've had some technical difficulties, but everybody is here. With that, I will turn it over to our guest moderator, Paul Rosen. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Barrington. As Barrington said, my name is Paul Rosen, and I'm going to be your fearless and hopefully mostly silent moderator today. The topic of this panel is intellectual property, pitfalls, and potentials. We have gathered an incredible group of panelists today to explore this fascinating topic, so let's get started. Just a quick housekeeping matter for our audience. We're going to have some time at the end for Q&A, so if you would like to pose any questions, just please use the chat button on your window and we'll do our best to cover them all. All right, let's just do some quick introductions. Our panelists today are Sher Ali Butt. Sher is the CEO of CB Therapeutics, a leading biotech company focused on the biosynthesis of cannabinoids, tryptamines, and their analogs. He was formerly the co-founder of and CSO of a laboratory testing firm and has worked for a number of leading pharmaceutical and wellness product companies. Second, Dr. Joseph Tucker. Dr. Tucker is the CEO of MagicMed Industries. Dr. Tucker has a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, as well as 20 years experience as a biotechnology entrepreneur and drug development executive. Previously, he was executive chairman of Biosciences, president and CEO of Stem Cell Therapeutics, and vice president of Resferlogic, all of which are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. In addition to his corporate work, Dr. Tucker teaches a master's level intellectual property course at the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Calgary, and he himself has 7 issued patents and numerous pending patents. David Wood is a lawyer at Borden, Ladner, and Gervais, one of the top law firms in the country. Psychedelics and cannabis are the sole focus of David's intellectual property, regulatory, and commercial practice. Driven by a strong commitment to responsible and effective access to psychedelics for improving, maintaining, and promoting health, David supports pro bono initiatives by nonprofit organizations to facilitate and expand access to LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, and other psychedelics for Canadians, notably both within and separate from Canada's prescription drug system under the Food and Drugs Act. David, the Law Society, hopefully did not hear that. And then finally, Penny White. Penny is the founder, a director, and the CEO of NeonMind. She's a serial entrepreneur with over 2 decades of building companies. She's been recognized in Profit Magazine's 100 Most Successful Entrepreneurs and previously served as CEO of a private company included in Profit's 500 Fastest Growing Companies in 2015. 2016, she has been involved in capital markets as a director, officer, founder, and lawyer for over 20 years. I'm going to start by just asking each of the panelists to provide a brief, and please be brief, overview of their companies and practices with an emphasis on why intellectual property is important to their company's success. Let's start with you, Dr. Tucker.
Thanks very much, Paul. I'm Joe, CEO of MagicMed. So MagicMed, we're taking a very pharmaceutical approach to this industry. We think that while there is a big opportunity in the, say, generic molecules or non-drug, non-patented molecules.
I think you're on mute, Penny.
There we go. Hi, thanks, Paul. NeonMind Biosciences, which is recently listed on the CSE. We are a psychedelic drug development company, and we have chosen for our first drug development project the treatment of obesity using synthetic psilocybin. So we're a little bit further along than some companies in that we're dealing with basically a substance that's already done quite a bit of testing internationally. Right now, we're in preclinical trials at UBC. We have an amazing group of doctors and scientists working with us to develop our protocols for our phase 2 trials. So we hope to start those this year. And we also have another division, which is medicinal mushrooms. We were talking earlier about what we're all drinking, and I am drinking the NeonMind coffee this morning, and I do recommend everyone try it. And that's for sale right now at neonmind.com. Thank you.
Look forward to it. Sher, I'd like to hear from you next, please.
Yeah, thank you for having me, first off. So CB Therapeutics is the first private company in the world to biosynthesize many different cannabinoids, also biosynthesis of psilocybin, 8 other molecules in mushrooms, DMT, many of the analogs. We have a collection which we're building to be the largest collection of these molecules in the world and their analogs. What sets us apart from any other biotech company in this space is the fact that we have our own 7,000 square foot facility equipped with about 40 different bioreactors for the production, the largest being a 400 liters. So we're able to iterate different strains of yeast and other types of organisms like bacteria, E. coli, etc., to produce these molecules and rapidly bring these to market. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. David, we can't see you, but are you there? Can we hear you? Barrington, I think David's asking for his request to speak to be activated. All right. Well, hopefully we're gonna.
He should be able to, but I'll work on it.
Okay. David, stand by. We're going to move the train along the tracks while we wait for your arrival, and we're looking forward to hearing from you shortly. So let's start with, I guess, what I would call the sort of elephant in the room, and that has to do with the relationship between existing API that's been around for decades and proven itself efficacious. So how will new IP-seeking chemical entities compete with existing APIs that are likely non-patentable but have strong safety and efficacy profiles? I'm thinking LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA. These all have long histories of proving to be safe and proving to be efficacious. How does new IP compete with those products? Let's start with Dr. Tucker, please.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's a great question. It really goes to the heart of what's going on in the industry right now is how do you address that question? From our point of view, we see this really as being more than one market. We think that absolutely these natural or classic molecules that have been around for a long time and have been demonstrated to be really pretty safe, that there's absolutely a role for them, likely in clinic delivery, and a certain subset of the population. I think when I say subset, I mean of the larger mental health population, that's going to be exactly the right answer for. And, we totally support everything that's going on there. Entities like USONA and MAPS really leading the way. We believe that there's actually a larger market opportunity outside of that population, people that don't want to come into the in-clinic setting, or really just the ability to deliver drugs, to administer drugs on an outpatient basis. We think that's where the big opportunity is. And for that, you need a different molecule. You need molecules that don't induce, for example, hallucinations, or you don't have the high risk of a bad trip, so that you can actually prescribe it and send patients home with that. And that's where you need a new molecule. And that's where you need, from our business point of view, that's where you need a patent around that new molecule.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Tucker. Sher, what are the implications for your company and for the development of the industry of all these incumbent APIs that are not patentable as pure compounds?
So I think the implications are, for us, for example, we're equally as happy to work on the F1 or F2 generation molecules. I think, of course, in the F2 generation, you have the added patentability of the molecule itself. But my view is that for a lot of these new analogs that ourselves and many other companies in the space are developing, it's going to take a much longer time to, like you said, to prove the safety, the efficacy, to see the stability of these molecules over time. So generally, I think that that's a much longer term project than something like, let's say, taking psilocybin or LSD, et cetera, or MDMA into these pipelines. Now, for CB Therapeutics, I think we're agnostic to that. Our approach today is mostly towards the generation or the biosynthesis of these molecules, more so the process itself, the ability to make these processes ultra efficient, more so than the actual going to medicine or taking them to clinical trials. Now, having said that, we do have a partnership with the Cleveland Clinic, and we will be rolling out some molecules with them sometime later this year to start some of these trials. But again, that's something of a secondary thing for us, the primary being the actual biosynthesis, the ability to make these molecules cheaper than anybody else out there.
Thank you, Sher. Penny, let me steer this towards you. I think one thing probably all three of you have in common is you've had to raise money for your company's development. And a common theme in corporate disclosure is that the industry needs new chemical entities for various reasons, but perhaps the most important being to provide a value proposition to raise the capital required to bring a new drug product to market and have the protection of monopoly on that substance. So Penny, apart from the benefit of being patented and viable for like a cost recovery on your drug development and your regulatory compliance, what benefits do you see from new chemical entity drugs over psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, DMT, and the other sort of incumbents that have a long history of use with very rare or non-existent toxic overdose?
I think, our strategy is really is filing secondary use patents. So we're taking a substance that has been widely used, is well known not to be toxic, and that's primarily psilocybin is what we've focused on. And we've basically come up with a new novel and non-obvious therapeutic use for that substance, which we now believe is quite viable. So we filed our first patent about 1.5 years ago, and that was regarding psilocybin and any analog, so any synthetic version of psilocybin for the treatment of weight loss, for obesity, for all related illnesses. So it's a secondary use patent that we're focused on. And I mean, sometimes those secondary, it's one of the biggest global burdens. It's considered a pandemic. So I think that's how we're attacking it. Another example of a drug that was very successful with a secondary use patent is Viagra. And we all know the success that drug has had.
Go reverse order. I'm going to start with Penny. It seems to me that unlike many other areas within the pharmaceutical industry, a significant percentage of the value chain in psychedelics will be with therapists as opposed to the sale of drug products.
We're trying to put as much of the care in the hands of the family physician so that the pre-care and the post-care can be done by your family doctor. And we'll train them properly to do that. And then also looking at potentially microdosing as an added feature. And of course, if that happens, then you have, the drug delivery and the drug purchases is a bigger part of the whole system. But not to underscore the value of the therapists. I think they're incredibly valuable. But for what we're doing, which is obesity, the therapeutic component is in the drug more than the therapy.
Got it. Thank you so much. I want to take this over to you, Joe. I'm going to ask the same question, but I'm going to ask it a little bit differently. And that is, anyone that pays attention to the industry, I think, is aware that there's a strong primacy put on what's called set and setting, the actual environment that you're in when you are taking the medicine. And so it asks the same question another way. Do you see set and setting as something that could be covered by intellectual property? Joe, that's for you.
That's for me, Paul?
Yes.
Yeah, not well, not functionally. At the end of the day, when you think your way through how is intellectual property used, right? And intellectual property is used. It doesn't give you the right to do anything. I'm going to be Professor Joe for a second here. It gives you the right to stop others from doing things. And one of the sacred cows of medicine is that you can't get between a doctor and their patient. You can't tell a doctor how to use it, how to prescribe it, to the point where, we all know about off-label use, that the vast majority of drugs are open to being off-label prescribed by the doctors. So, I think forget about trying to claim or block doctors from using a drug in any particular way. I don't think it's going to happen. Yeah, I could go on and on, but yeah, I don't think that's really going to happen here. So I think that I do agree with your earlier comment, Paul, that for the existing molecules, the classic psychedelics, it's going to, because they're generic molecules, manufacturing is a pivot point. Sher is right in the right place. It's a pivot point for this whole business, this whole industry. But I think it's going to be a race to the bottom ultimately, which is going to reduce the cost. And so you're going to have, dollars to be made by the therapists. There's going to be some dollars made by the manufacturers, but it's going to become a commodity business at the end of the day, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Sher, I'd like to get some feedback from you, but I also want to ask you, I guess, a somewhat related question. I think it's understood that your IP protects your product. It creates a little bit of a moat around it, but there's also going to be, I think, multiple formulations for individual illnesses. Like, for example, Penny, there may be more than one product derived from from psychedelic compounds that address obesity, anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, PTSD, et cetera, et cetera. So aside from actually getting a patent, Sher, what are other good ways from a market sense to create a moat around your intellectual property?
So it depends. Again, obviously, I'm not a professor like Dr. Joseph Tucker on IP, but I know a little bit just to get by with what we've done. And there's different ways to do it, right? So obviously, one is obviously doing the patent itself. Another one is having a trade secret. I think if it's something that's relatively non-obvious and something that you absolutely can't have something out in the public, I think it's good to have a trade secret. Trademarks, another big one. I think trademarks are something that are used relatively frequently for products or product types, things of that nature. Referring back to the original question about how IP is going to really help with the landscape of potentially customers interaction or setting. I do think that there may be some way to protect that, but that protection would be quite loose. So of course, at the end of the day, when we look at patenting anything, one of the things that you realize as a company is that you can technically patent a lot of different things. Now, the bigger question is that actually really valuable to the business or what you're doing? So, most of the patents, for example, that I've seen in the space, or not like concerning biosynthesis, but other places, a lot of those patents, I look at them and I see, how is this really going to be applied, or how is that going to work out? And maybe Dr. Joseph can enlighten us on how that would work. But I do see that issue where not every patent that is filed is actually useful. So I think that's a big thing that people need to kind of wrap their heads around.
Thank you, Sher. Not sure if David has been able to join us. I see him on the chat. Silence is probably a no then. Okay, that's a shame, because David would have had a number of, I'm sure, illuminating insights into the questions we're covering. David's information, by the way, for everyone that's attending, is on the chat. If you'd like to connect with him after, he's provided his contact information. All right, let's just keep moving this around. There's so much to cover here. Joe, let me start with you on this. In your opinion, will intellectual property block future desirable products from becoming available to society?
That's a really good question, Paul. Thanks. Yeah, that is something I've heard before, is that folks are concerned, in particular, in the space that we're in right now, everyone's trying to file composition of matter, for example, patents on new molecules. And the question is, to restate your question, the question is, society has a deal with the inventor, the entrepreneur. You teach us some great new discovery. After we've given you a short-term monopoly, it becomes owned by society, public domain for the rest of time. And, in new drugs that have to go through, so, in cases like psilocybin, where USONA is out there and actually funding the cost of the clinical trials and is going to get psilocybin approved, you actually don't need a big pharma, frankly, coming along to get psilocybin approved, because USONA is going to take care of it for us, doing the service to the public. But for other molecules, not psilocybin, not MDMA, not LSD, that are new, those are not going to be funded. You need to get through clinical trials. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. If you don't have a patent on those, None of those will ever get through. And, so my favorite example on this is Shulgin. Many people know about Shulgin, his great books, where he did a lot of experimentation in his garage and found some great drugs. But you know what? Those drugs that he made in his home chemistry, they're never going to become pharmaceuticals in society because they're not patentable now. No one's ever going to spend the money to get them through. So, he actually did us a bit of a disservice. So sorry for being on the soapbox, but I think patents is actually, when it comes to new molecules, it's how you get them into society and ultimately they become public domain.
Fascinating. Thank you, Dr. Tucker. Penny, just because you're sipping your coffee, which is also made with functional or maybe active mushrooms, what is your position and what's Neon's position on the patenting of natural products?
Well, I think it's the same problem that Joseph was addressing. A lot of these medicinal mushrooms, the benefits are sort of widely known in society, and there's been maybe some animal trials, but most of them don't have human trials. And so if I wanted to take lion's mane and do a human trial for cognitive function, which everybody knows works, I wouldn't have the patent protection. So what would I be able to do? I'd basically be spending $100 million to pave the way for everybody else. And it just doesn't make economic sense. There are certain things you can do. I mean, the FDA is very loosey-goosey about sort of what you put on your packaging. We're actually preparing our packaging as a supplement in the US right now, and you have to have backing for it, but it's not the same as Health Canada, which has a very narrow list of uses. And when we come out with our Canadian supplement version of those medicinal mushrooms, it's very unusual things that we have to say, and some of them don't even make sense. Would we like to take some of these medicinal mushrooms that we know are effective for so many things and take them through trials? Well, it would be nice, but does it make economic sense? No, it doesn't.
Okay, very interesting. Sher, let me rotate this to you. I'm going to bring up the dreaded R word, recreational applications, because I think we all anticipate that that's a possibility, if not a likelihood. Sher, do you see different IP strategies for clinical, recreational, or even other types of business models in the space?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that comes back to the original thought, which is, before you file an IP or, go for a trademark or anything, the biggest thing to look at is your own business model, see how that's going to pan out in the future, what exactly are the company's own requirements, what exactly the company's trying to do. So I think it's great that we have a panel with three different companies that are IP heavy, but we all have different business models. And I think when you talk to each individual, you'll see, if you were to look at, each of our portfolios, I imagine they would be different. So I think one person would be on the formulation of the molecules, another person would be the combination, another would be on the biosynthesis or the production side. So I do think that, fundamentally, anybody who's looking at patents or is starting a company with patents has to look at that particular equation to see whether or not it makes sense or what angle they're attacking the patent landscape. Secondly, I do think that, I totally agree with the arguments that, yes, we do need patents for innovations in society. It's a way to bring things forward. It's a way for society to pay back the company or the entrepreneur or the inventor to move forward. But, there is also something known as patent trolls. So I think there's a very fine line in society today for private companies, frankly, where, of actually disclosing an invention that's really going to help people's lives versus just being a patent troll and just printing patents out by the masses and, blocking people from doing something. So I think that fine line, I think, still needs to be found.
Thank you. I'm just going to check again to see if David might have been able to join us. I see him active on the chat. Oh, okay. I'm sure he is chomping.
Unfortunately, he will.
Okay.
We're going to keep trying, but
I see David frustrated. He's saying, "I have very important things I want to say on these rich topics."
And for our audience members, please reach out to him if you do have questions. He's extremely knowledgeable, extremely professional, and again, it's David Wood for BLG.
Great, thank you, Barrington. I want to talk about the money here because this stuff's not cheap, as far as I know. It's drug development, if you will. And I guess this is sort of a two-part question just to go through the panel. Aside from spending money that doesn't, ring the bell and achieve, what are the biggest risks in filing patent applications, aside from failing and not getting your IP? And then also, each panelist give me an estimation of what they think, anything that they're trying to get IP around, what they think it's going to ultimately cost in terms of hard money out before they say get FDA approval or Health Canada approval. Let's go backwards. Sher, let's start with you on that.
Yeah, so how much it costs. So I think the first question is, if you're looking at filing a patent, like which countries do you want to do it at? Typically, the typical strategy, I'll just go over it very briefly, is, you want to start out with a provisional patent. The provisional, whenever you file. So let's say if I file a provisional patent today on a new pathway that I figured out that makes a unique molecule. If I file a provisional today, then I have about a year to figure out any improvements or things of that nature. So then a year later, now I can file the actual application. At that point, I also want to decide whether I want to take it in different countries, whether I want to keep it in the US, whether I want to take it to Canada, Europe, Australia, etc. The more countries that you add on, of course, the costlier it's going to get. So, for just, on a very tight budget, if you were just doing one country or a very small thing, I think you could probably do it for like a few $1,000s, like maybe $4,000 or $5,000. But if you're looking at, let's say, taking something global and making it a big deal, then it's going to cost you, upwards of $50,000 to $80,000. Estimation is what I've seen. So I think the other one pitfall I would that I've seen people make mistakes is some people that I've seen have hired patent attorneys that are not in their specific field. So they'll get somebody who's not a biotech attorney, for example, and they're a patent attorney in some other field. And then, they'll rake up, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in costs, and then find out that they could have done that for $4,000 or $5,000. So that's another big pitfall and something to watch out for if you're looking to file patents, is to make sure you have the right type of attorneys and the right type of breadth or subject matter, and then also make sure that, you're not getting charged too much money for that.
Thank you, Sher. Dr. Tucker, let me just circle to you, and let's make clear for the audience, there's a difference between getting a patent and getting, for example, approval from a local health authority for to make it an approved medicine, for example, the FDA. So does getting a patent assist you when you submit and go through a drug development process in say, America with the FDA? Because the drug development process is a heck of a lot more money than the patent application process, obviously, by like several commas. So what's the connection between having a patent, being able to bring it to market, and requiring something like FDA approval to actually have doctors legally prescribe said medication?
Well, so there's not a direct connection in terms of, having a patent makes it easier to go through the clinical trial process. That's not the case, but there is a very interesting relationship, in particular in the United States, between having a patent and having and running the clinical trials. So if you get a product approved and you have patent protection on it, they actually list your IP, that you disclose to the FDA what your patents are, and it's in a book, and now it's actually the FDA uses that to block others who are seeking approval. They may come along with your exact molecule and say, we like one too, and they'll actually stop the subsequent people from coming along from actually getting approval based on that. So there's an interesting connection there, and there's, on the flip side of it, for products that are generics, there's actually a process to expedite approval, the whole genericization. There's things you may have heard like 505(b)(2) pathway, which basically means somebody else has already got a product approved and it's generic, and you can show up in the FDA and say, I didn't actually do any of these preclinical or clinical studies myself. I didn't spend the $500 million. They did, but because I'm making the same molecule as them, I'd like you to approve me like that. And that happens. So it's quite a very interesting dynamic between the two. And so at the end of the day, a new molecule, you got a patent, you're in great shape. Once something is generic, all the other generic companies are going to be all over you. They're going to knock down fences to make it easy for generic companies to come in and eat your market, frankly.
Noted. Interesting. All of this is absolutely fascinating. Penny, so far only a few psychedelic compounds have been scientifically evaluated in humans, and obviously different psychedelic drugs could provide advantages depending on the use case. So when do you think we might see the first human studies of these new molecules?
Well, I haven't thought about this question before, but I guess you would have to probably go through about 2 to 3 years of preclinical work before you get to that level. A phase 1 trial, we've looked into it for psilocybin, what it would take, for example. So I think once you've done your preclinical work, you're ready to get into a phase 1. I think that whole sort of that part of the development process takes about 3 years. I'm just guessing though, and I'm not an expert in that area.
Thank you. What's the role of Big Pharma here? This is a panel question, and I'm speaking specifically, let's say, for example, you have a product that has achieved patent protection, a formulation, say, but now you want to go through a process of, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, if it's in the United States, time-consuming, expensive. Is that the role, do you think, for Big Pharma to come in once a patent has been achieved and some efficacy has been established, if you can do that, to help underwrite the enormous expense of having it approved by a health authority? Let's start with Dr. Tucker.
Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Paul. That's really where Big Pharma steps in. And interestingly, although, a decade ago, you might have seen Big Pharma, or perhaps 2 decades ago, you might have seen Big Pharma get involved in a big market opportunity early on, like phase 1. Today, that's not the case. Big Pharma tends to sit back and wait until products are phase 3 or even approved now. They're just so risk averse, and they would much rather write a huge check. They'd rather spend $1 billion and buy something that's approved or almost approved than $50 million to pay early. So I think there is this middle ground, and that's the biotech companies, right? The biotech companies that we see out there, like Excitement or Field Trip or others. That's the role that they have to play, is to fund and take through the middle of the early to late stage clinical trials. And then when it gets near the end, then Big Pharma tends to say, this has been de-risked. It didn't kill people in phase 1. It looked like it worked in phase 2. Now we're ready to write a big check. That's what I expect out of the Big Pharma industry.
Cool. Penny, do you want to weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, sure. And I was just going to mention that, if you're not looking to get acquired, there's also the possibility of partnering with Big Pharma in phase 3. So totally agreeing with what Joseph is saying. And really, that's our strategy. So if we can get through a successful phase 2, then we'll be looking to partner with a big pharmaceutical company to really carry out the phase 3 part of the trial. Great.
And Sher?
Yeah, I generally tend to agree. My overall thought on this is that, the model of what psychedelics offer to the people for mental health is a lot different from the business model that Big Pharma has set up. Traditionally, Big Pharma's business model is the pill a day is going to keep you chugging along, and that's sort of how they make money. The more product we consume, the more money that they make. I think psychedelics offer a very different paradigm for the consumer or the health user. Is you don't need it every day potentially. So, for example, for psilocybin or other molecules, you need one dose every once in a while, unless you're doing like a microdose or something like that. So I think it remains yet to be seen how exactly Big Pharma is going to interact. In my opinion, I think there might be some purchases of some products or companies that make compelling business cases for Big Pharma. But I think for the most part, I think they might just be looking and seeing how everything evolves before they sort of jump in here.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I've sometimes said that the cannabis was the battering ram that opened up the door for a whole reevaluation in society of plant-based medications. And they're different, but there are some similarities. One debate that has roiled the cannabis industry for the last several years is isolate versus full spectrum distillate. And everyone that pays attention in the cannabis industry knows about the entourage effect, that the cannabinoids work better in harmony with each other. And now I've seen some of the same academic or philosophical wrangling around the psychedelic industry as we start to isolate specific compounds. Arguments are being made that it has diminished efficacy compared to, say, a full spectrum if we were talking about psilocybin. So I wonder if I just might get some point of view from each panelist on how they view, is the entourage effect as important and paramount in the plant-based psychedelic, not the synthetic, sure, but in the plant-based as it is in cannabis, or are we talking about an entirely different paradigm? Let's start with you, Penny.
Sure. So from what I've heard, there is a different effect between psilocybin as the plant coming from magic mushrooms and psilocybin that is a synthesized compound. I hear it's different, and I have heard, but I haven't seen the scientific backing, I've heard that it's not as effective. Whether that can be dealt with by dose, I don't know. You know, based on sort of the work I've done and the knowledge I have in cannabis, I think that there probably is an entourage effect, and I think you're probably going to lose something potentially when you move to a synthesized version, but I have no idea what that is. I don't think really anyone does at this point. But we do know that magic mushrooms have certain benefits, and other, you know, psychedelic drugs have certain benefits. It's going to be really interesting as time goes on to see how we can compare those two, and I guess we'll find out more as the research continues.
Excellent. Sher, I mean, you're a biosynthesis company, so you're in a good position to defend, you know, synthesis, if you will. How do you see this playing out, if you will, natural plant, full spectrum versus synthesized single spectrum?
I mean, contrary to what everybody's expecting me to say, I'm definitely not defending the single molecule theory. So a little bit of context here is that, you know, there is a couple studies that I've looked at for CBD, for example, just to set like the precedent. I think the study was done in Israel, which showed that, you know, if you had the isolated compound of CBD versus the full spectrum CBD, the effect was dampened by about 30%. So, of course, we already know that scientifically it makes sense to have some level of entourage effect there. I believe in this enough that, you know, for example, the cannabinoids or even the molecules from the mushrooms, et cetera, that we've been working on, we've always had that in mind. So, for example, with mushrooms, I'll just start with say about that. We have 10 or 11 of the active molecules in mushrooms, aside from just psilocybin itself. So, you know, when we're looking at, we've talked to a lot of clinics and people that want to start studies with us or give them product for clinical trials. And I think that's one of the big things that we're coming across now is, you know, not everybody wants just a single molecule. And I think that's something that over time, I think will be more prevalent, is that, you know, I don't think, so another thing to say is I don't think anybody knows what those specific ratios for other molecules should be, but I think that's what the studies need to be done for. So I think it's a very interesting, unique point. Now, for new molecules or for new things, of course, there may not be other sort of entourage molecules to accompany that. And of course, that's totally acceptable. If you look at, you know, FDA approved molecules, a lot of them are single molecules. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but I think there is a case to be made that the entourage effect can enhance medical effects or things for people. And I think it's a good thing for the industry as a whole to see that.
Dr. Tucker, you have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, so you must have a point of view on this topic. Please dive in.
I do, and I'm the guy that actually doesn't really believe in the entourage effect for cannabinoids. I think it's, you know, sorry, Dr. Joe here, but I think it's mostly came out of a lack of data, a lack of knowledge. People were unable to really isolate all the different single molecules and test them. And so they said, well, when we have a whole bunch of them together, we get this great effect. So it must be entourage. So I've never been a really big believer that the data supported entourage for cannabinoids. Having said that, it makes a lot more sense for the tryptamines, in other words, for the psilocybins, et cetera. These molecules, they're all serotonin mimics. We have, you know, serotonin is this neurotransmitter. It's a hormone. It's used throughout the body. We have 14 different classes of serotonin receptors that pick it up. So just throwing in, you know, one pure molecule, you're probably hitting a variety of these receptors. And if you throw in a handful of mimics into a handful of different receptors, yeah. So, you know, it's entirely possible that there's a real conflation, that there are a lot of different things going on all at the same time that we're trying to put one word on, one name on. So I think entourage effect is entirely possible in the serotonin molecules, the 5-HTs, in other words, the psychedelics. I think it's entirely possible, you know. But with regard to the FDA, it was mentioned, you know, the FDA hates when somebody comes to them and says, here, I got a mixture of stuff. I got 5 things in here. The FDA says, well, what does what? How do you know what dose one's supposed to be at?
Right.
How do you know when this dose is toxic and this dose is effective? And when you say, I don't know, the FDA hates that stuff. So they really want you to come forward with a single molecule, prove what it does from an efficacy wise, prove its toxicity, get it approved, and then later you can add another approved one and mix them together. But, you know, first time showing up with a mixture of stuff and saying, I don't really know what it does, they hate that stuff.
Interesting. Hey, Barrington, I'm just going to shout out to David one last Hail Mary to see if David is able to join us at the end to share any concluding comments he may have.
I don't think he's going to be joining us, but he is here in spirit, and by that I mean on the chat. For our audience, please look at the chat. He's added more color and depth to some of the responses, as well as some of the inquiries by our audience members. So again, it's David Wood at BLG. He's a partner, brilliant mind in the space. But yeah, so we have 1 minute. So I just wanted to hear from last thoughts.
I guess I'll just, because a minute is not a long time, unless of course you happen to be under the influence of psilocybin, in which case it could be several hours of perceived time. Trust me, I've been there more than once. I mean, I'm a capital market enthusiast. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a wellness practitioner. And I seek, you know, in pursuit of good mental and physical health. I find a lot of these modalities in my life highly effective, without necessarily knowing what the science behind it was. I have had only positive experiences with psilocybin, LSD, 5-MeO-DMT. Each one has been really, really powerful. Ayahuasca as well. And I'm sort of watching in fascination and potential horror as this industry develops so quickly, because I do, hope that we sort of don't get out ahead of, in terms of creating expectations among the investment community. I'm hoping that we don't get out over our skis a little bit. And we've already started to see sort of like this whole, and I say this with great respect to the CSC, but a whole number of companies rushing to go public. Anyone that was in cannabis early as I was will see some very similar patterns here. A lot of volatility, but I often tell investors, and I am one myself, that a lot of these companies are in the drug development business, and you really have to think about this very differently than about they're going to have a chain of dispensaries selling cannabis products across North America. I will say, though, that it's the quality of the executives in the psychedelic industry that give me a great deal of support and comfort as an investor. I think we saw exactly why I feel that way today with Penny and Dr. Tucker and Sher. These are bright, hardworking people with a lot of passion, a lot of expertise, and a lot of ability, and they are a proxy for the talent that is flooding into this industry. So I think it's, of course, as an investor, this is a CSE webinar, a certain amount of buyer beware and don't get caught up in the FOMO, but we're talking about the potential for transformative new paradigms addressing the biggest issue facing public health, which is mental health, in my opinion, and likely physical health as well. So I just want to thank the incredible panelists for their illuminating insights today, and our audience for taking time out of their busy day, inauguration day for those of you in the States, to watch this presentation. And Barrington, to you, the CSE, to Frank Lane, and to CFN Media, thank you so much for making this incredibly important platform available.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Paul. For our audience, is the link for the final session is in the chat, and Paul provided a very nice segue into it. It deals with investing and banking and capital markets and all of those juicy subjects. So please join us for one more session. Big round of applause for our panel 2, the Pitfalls, and what was the title of it? Pitfalls and Potentials of in the space. And of course, thank you to CFN Media and Zuber, Lawler as well. So see you on the next panel. We start in about 12 minutes. Thank you.